It was just another night on the road, or so I thought. I've been driving trucks for over a decade. The long hours behind the wheel, the endless stretches of road, and the lonely nights with only the hum of the engine to keep me company. It's the life I've known. But tonight was different. The sun had long set, and the only thing visible beyond the headlights was the deep, inky black of the highway. The truck's tires rolled over the pavement like a steady rhythm, a lullaby for someone used to the grind of endless miles. I was on a stretch of Route 64, somewhere between towns, far from any lights or signs of civilization. My radio crackled, its weak signal bouncing between stations. I switched it off, the silence in the cab thickening. I had done this drive hundreds of times, but something felt off tonight, a feeling like I wasn't alone. I'd shaken it off before. Being a trucker means you get jumpy sometimes, especially when you spend so much time in isolation. But something felt different. Maybe it was just the isolation messing with my mind, or maybe it was something more. As I passed a worn-out sign that read "Rest Stop 10 miles," I debated pulling over. I was tired, and the last thing I needed was to push myself too far. But the rest stop was dark, too quiet, and I didn't like the thought of being that alone. I checked my GPS, nothing ahead for miles except more dark highway. The thought of pushing through was tempting, so I kept driving. An hour passed, and the feeling only grew stronger. There was a sensation, almost like eyes watching me from the shadows. I glanced into my rearview mirror and saw only empty road, yet something nagged at the back of my mind. Then it happened. I saw someone standing at the edge of the road. My heart skipped a beat, and my hands instinctively gripped the steering wheel tighter. The figure was tall, thin, and dressed in what looked like ragged clothes. For a moment, I thought it might be a hitchhiker, but that didn't make sense. This was a stretch of road so isolated that even the most desperate wouldn't be out here. I slowed the truck down, my instincts on edge, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts clouding my mind. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself. I accelerated, not wanting to linger longer in that unsettling stretch. But no matter how fast I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The road stretched on endlessly, the dark highway weaving like a serpent under the pale glow of the truck's headlights. I kept my foot heavy on the accelerator, the sound of the engine vibrating through the truck's steel frame. Every mile felt longer, every turn more unsettling. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. I glanced into my rearview mirror again. Still nothing. The road was empty, but it didn't feel empty. It felt wrong. The night air felt heavy, oppressive, and the silence in the truck grew unbearable. Even the usual hum of the engine seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the eerie quiet. That was when I noticed something strange. The truck's lights, were they dimming? No, I was imagining things. I checked the dashboard, and everything seemed fine. But then, out of nowhere, the radio clicked back on with a burst of static. I reached for the dial, about to turn it off when I heard a voice, soft at first, but growing clearer. "Please." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I yanked the radio volume down, but the voice continued, now more distinct, desperate. "Please, don't leave me. They'll get you too." My heart pounded. Was it a prank? A broken station? But there was something about the voice, a pleading, terrified tone, that made me feel cold all over. It was too real. Suddenly, the truck's headlights flickered. I cursed under my breath and swerved, trying to stay in my lane. For a brief second, I thought I saw someone, standing on the side of the road again, just in the edge of the light. This time, I didn't slow down. I floored the pedal, my eyes wide with panic. But I couldn't shake the image of that figure. It was almost as though the shadows themselves were swallowing the road ahead. The radio crackled again. "You're close now. Turn back. It's not too late." I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. Who was this? How could they know where I was? I was miles away from anything familiar. My instincts screamed at me to stop, but I couldn't. The road was my world, and I needed to keep. I checked the GPS. The next town was miles ahead, too far to turn back now. But as I looked down, I saw something else on the screen. The map had changed. It no longer showed the road ahead, but twisted, distorted lines, an unfamiliar path snaking off the highway. I blinked. It was as if the map itself had shifted. God, what the hell is going on? The truck lurched beneath me, and I felt the engine sputter. I pushed the accelerator down harder, but the engine seemed to be losing power. I tried to call dispatch, but my phone had no signal. It was as if I was being swallowed by the night. And that was when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, a man. His clothes were tattered, and his face was obscured by a dark, wide-brimmed hat. His posture was stiff, unnatural, like he was a part of the road itself, like he'd been waiting for me. I slammed on the brakes, my heart in my throat. The truck screeched to a halt just inches from the figure. For a moment, there was complete silence, and then the man slowly turned to face me. His eyes, black as coal, with no whites, pierced through the darkness. His lips twisted into a sickening smile, and I saw that his teeth were sharp, too sharp. You shouldn't have come, he rasped, his voice a low growl that seemed to echo in the cab of my truck. This road, it claims all who travel it. My hands shook, sweat trickling down my forehead. I tried to throw the truck into reverse, but the gears wouldn't budge. My heart pounded in my chest as the man took a slow step forward, his grin widening. Before I could react, something slammed into the side of the truck with an explosion of force, knocking me sideways. The truck rocked violently, and I was thrown against the steering wheel. I struggled to regain control, but the world seemed to spin around me. The radio crackled again, this time with screams, the distorted sound of voices crying out for help. Voices twisted in torment. I could barely breathe. Panic consumed me. The truck's headlights flickered and went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I heard footsteps, slow, methodical, the sound of boots on ground. Then, a cold, unnatural breath brushed against the side of my face. It was like something inhuman, and I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The man's face loomed close to the window now, his black eyes boring into mine. His lips parted, revealing rows of jagged teeth, like a predator waiting to strike. Anywhere, he whispered, the words sending a chill down my spine. The road will keep you. It's too late. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The truck was trapped, stuck in the grip of something beyond reason. The man's face grinned wider. Then, just as suddenly as it had all started, everything went quiet. I opened my eyes, and the road was gone. Instead, I was surrounded by nothing but thick, swirling fog. The truck was motionless, and in the distance I saw faint lights flickering. A town? Maybe. But as I looked closer, I realized the lights weren't from any normal place. They were distant, strange. They didn't belong. The fog thickened. The road twisted, and in the silence, I heard it again, the voice. Welcome to the end. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years. You get used to the loneliness of the road, the long nights, and the endless highways. But something happened a few years back that I'll never forget, and it still gives me chills every time I think about it. It was late October, and the weather was already starting to turn cold. I had a long haul from Denver, Colorado to Salt Lake City, Utah. The route wasn't new to me, I'd driven it dozens of times, but that night, something felt off. The job started like any other. I loaded the cargo, nothing unusual, just pallets of canned goods, and hit the road. The first couple of hours were uneventful. I had my favorite playlist running, coffee in my thermos, and a pack of sunflower seeds to keep me awake. The highway stretched on forever, dark and empty, except for the occasional car passing by. Around midnight, I hit a stretch of roads surrounded by dense forest. That's when the strange stuff began. A thick fog rolled in, out of nowhere. It was so sudden and so dense that I had to slow down to a crawl. My headlights barely pierced the gray wall in front of me. I've driven in bad weather before, But this was different. The fog felt alive. It clung to the truck, swirling and shifting like it was trying to get inside. About 20 minutes into the fog, I saw someone standing by the side of the road. A hitchhiker, I thought at first. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The figure was too tall, unnaturally so, with long, gangly limbs that didn't look quite human. They wore a tattered coat and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows over their face, even in the foggy glow of my headlights. I don't pick up hitchhikers. Never have, never will. But as I passed, I felt the figure's eyes on me. It was like they were boring into my soul, cold and piercing. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than they needed to. About 10 miles later, the fog cleared a bit, and I started to relax. I told myself it was just some weirdo out for a walk in the middle of nowhere. But then I saw them again, the same tall figure standing by the side of the road. This time I was sure. There was no way they could have gotten ahead of me, not on foot, and not that fast. My stomach churned. I pressed on the gas, wanting to put as much distance between me and them as possible. But it didn't matter. Over the next hour, I saw the figure 3 more times, always the same spot, standing perfectly still, head slightly tilted, watching. By then, I was starting to panic. My CB radio wasn't picking up any chatter, and my phone had no signal. It was just me, the truck, and whatever was out there. I finally decided to pull over at a small rest area. It wasn't much, just a couple of picnic tables and an old vending machine, but I needed to clear my head. I parked the truck, stepped outside, and took a deep breath. The air was cold and sharp, but at least the fog was gone. I checked the truck, making sure everything was secure. As I walked around to the back, I noticed something odd. There were long, thin handprints on the side of the trailer. They stretched up higher than any human could reach. My heart raced as I ran my hand over them. The prints felt damp, like something had been crawling along the side. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping noise, coming from inside the trailer. I froze. The cargo was sealed tight when I left Denver. No one should have been able to get inside. Slowly, I climbed up to the back doors and listened. The tapping continued, irregular and faint, like someone or something was moving around inside. My hands shook as I unlocked the doors. When I swung them open, the trailer was empty, just like it should have been. The pallets of canned goods were untouched, but on the floor, scratched into the wood, was a single word: leave. I didn't stick around to investigate. I slammed the doors shut, locked them, and got back in the cab. My instincts screamed at me to keep moving. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept my eyes on the road, refusing to look at the trees or the shadows in the mirrors. I just wanted to get to Salt Lake City and finish the haul, but somewhere near the Utah border, I felt it. I wasn't alone. It started as a faint smell, wet earth and decay, like something had been rotting in the sun. Then I heard breathing, shallow and raspy, coming from behind my seat. My heart pounded as I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I saw it. A face, pale and stretched, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. I swerved, nearly running off the road. When I looked again, the face was gone, but the smell lingered, and the breathing didn't stop. I turned up the music, trying to drown out the sound, but it didn't. By the time I reached the city limits, the smell and the breathing had stopped. I pulled into the delivery yard, jumped out of the cab, and refused to look back. The workers unloaded the cargo, and I handed off the paperwork without a word. Before I left, one of the workers called out to me, "Hey, driver, you forget something?" I turned, confused. He was holding a small, tattered coat, the same coat I'd seen on the figure by the road. I didn't answer. I just got in the truck and drove straight to the nearest motel. I quit driving that route after that night. For a while, I even thought about giving up trucking altogether. But the road calls, and I'm still out here, driving long nights and lonely highways. Every now and then, though, I think about that figure in the fog, and I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for the next driver to pass by. If you ever find yourself on that stretch of road between Denver and Salt Lake, Keep your eyes open. And whatever you do, don't stop." Years passed, but that night stayed with me. Every time I passed a dense patch of fog or drove a lonely stretch of road, I couldn't help but glance at the mirrors, half expecting to see that pale, hollow face staring back at me. But I never did. Until last month, I was on a routine haul through the Midwest. Nothing unusual about the route or the cargo. The sky was overcast, and the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. As I drove through a narrow, winding stretch of road, a familiar fog began to roll in. My chest tightened, and I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then I saw it, that same tall figure standing by the side of the road, wearing the same tattered coat and wide-brimmed hat. This time, it wasn't watching me from a distance. It was standing directly in the middle of the lane, forcing me to stop. My heart raced as I slammed on the brakes. The truck came to a screeching halt, just feet away from the figure. For a moment, everything was silent. Then slowly, the figure tilted its head, as if curious. I don't know what came over me, but I threw the truck into reverse, intending to back away and turn around. But as I did, the fog thickened, swallowing the road behind me. I was trapped. The figure began to move, its long limbs bending and twisting unnaturally as it approached. I honked the horn, but it didn't flinch. It just kept coming. And then I heard it, the same raspy breathing I'd heard that night years ago. This time, it wasn't coming from behind me. It was all around me, echoing in the cab, as if the air itself was alive. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I woke up slumped over the wheel, the truck parked on the side of the road. The fog was gone, and the sun was rising over the horizon. My hands were shaking, and my throat was dry. When I stepped out to check the truck, I found something carved into the driver's side door. 4 simple words that chilled me to my core: "You can't escape us." I quit trucking the next day, sold the rig, packed up my life, and moved to a small town far away from any major highways. I don't drive long distances anymore, and I avoid foggy nights at all costs. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that breathing, and I know they're still out there, waiting. No distant hum of other vehicles, no animals rustling in the woods, just silence, broken only by the growl of my engine. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. My heart jumped and I slammed the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt and the figure didn't move. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress that looked soaked, as if she'd been standing in the rain. But there was no rain. I rolled down my window. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I called out, but she didn't respond. Her head hung low, hair covering her face. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Something wasn't right. I reached for my flashlight, stepped out of the truck, and approached her slowly. "Ma'am, do you need help?" She lifted her head, and I'll never forget what I saw. Her eyes were hollow sockets, and her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. Before I could react, she let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the night. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. When I blinked, she was gone. Just gone. My heart was pounding as I scrambled back into the truck and locked the doors. I didn't care where the delivery was anymore. I just wanted to get out of there, but the truck wouldn't start. I turned the key over and over, but all I got was a clicking noise. The fog outside thickened, pressing against the windows like it was alive. I felt trapped, like I was sitting in a metal coffin. Then I heard it, a faint tapping on the passenger window. My head snapped to the side, but there was no one there. The tapping came again, this time from the back of the truck. I grabbed a wrench from under my seat and climbed out to check. The fog was so dense I could barely see a few feet ahead. I walked to the back, my breath visible in the icy air. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, raspy whisper. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Turn back," the voice said. I swung the wrench wildly, shouting into the night, "Who's there? What do you want?" Silence. I hurried back to the cab, heart racing. When I got in, the truck roared to life on its own. The headlights flickered, and in their glow, I saw her again. the woman in white, standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. Her hollow eyes burned into mine as I hit the gas and sped away. For miles, I didn't look back. The GPS tried to reroute me, but I ignored it, sticking to the main road. I didn't stop until I reached a well-lit truck stop hours later. Inside, I told the cashier what had happened. His face went pale. "You were on Route 66A, weren't you?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah. Why?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "That road's cursed. They say a woman died there decades ago in a car crash. She wanders the road, looking for help. But anyone who stops, they never make it out alive." I left the truck stop shaken, but thankful I'd escaped. That was the last time I ever took an unfamiliar back road. Now, every time I hear the hum of my engine at night, I think about her hollow eyes and the warning in that whisper, "Turn back." I sat in my truck at the truck stop for what felt like hours, replaying the night's events in my mind. I couldn't shake her image, those hollow eyes and that haunting grin. Even the warning, "Turn back," echoed in my head like a broken record. Was it a coincidence that my truck had failed at that exact moment? Or had someone made it happen? I finally decided to keep driving. I didn't want to stay in one place too long, especially not after hearing the cashier's story. My delivery route was still programmed into the GPS, but I wasn't planning on finishing the job. I'd find a safe place, call my dispatcher, and explain everything. But as I pulled out of the truck stop and onto the main highway, something strange happened. The GPS rerouted itself back to Route 66A. I cursed under my breath and switched it off, relying on the road signs instead. Yet no matter which turn I took, the highway seemed to twist and loop back toward that cursed road. It felt impossible, like the truck was being drawn there. The miles stretched endlessly, and the darkness outside seemed thicker than before. Even the stars were hidden, as if the sky itself had turned against me. I glanced at the clock. It was stuck at the same time I'd first encountered her. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a bad night. It felt like I'd been marked, pulled into something far beyond my understanding. Around 3 a.m., I stopped at the side of the road to catch my breath. The air inside the cab felt suffocating. I rolled down the window and let the cold night air in, hoping it would clear my head. I took a long sip from my coffee thermos, but it was ice cold, even though I'd poured it fresh hours ago. That's when I heard the sound of breathing, soft and steady, coming from right behind me. I froze, gripping the wheel. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sleeper cab behind me. In the dim light, I could just make out a shape, someone sitting there. It was her. She was perched on the edge of the bunk, her wet dress dripping onto the floor. Her head tilted slightly, and her empty eyes locked onto mine. "You didn't turn back," she whispered, her voice dry and cracked, like leaves crunching underfoot. I scrambled out of the truck, nearly tripping over myself. My flashlight was in my hand again, but it felt useless against whatever she was. "Leave me alone," I shouted, my voice echoing into the empty night. But when I looked back into the cab, she was gone. Only the faint impression of wet footprints remained, leading toward the driver's seat. I got back in, too afraid to stay outside. The truck roared to life and I hit the gas, pushing it harder than I ever had before. The road ahead seemed endless, the trees on either side a blur. I kept driving, hoping to see the glow of a city or even another car, anything to prove I wasn't trapped in some twisted nightmare. But the road didn't end. It just stretched on, a straight line into the abyss. The clock on the dashboard flickered and changed, the numbers rearranging themselves into shapes I didn't recognize. The radio crackled to life, though I hadn't turned it on, playing a low, distorted voice that sounded almost human. I slammed my fist on the dashboard. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. The voice on the radio grew louder, and I could finally make out the words, "Turn!" "Back!" I screamed, yanking the wheel to the side. The truck skidded off the road and into a ditch. The impact jolted me forward, but the seatbelt held me in place. My head spun, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, the truck was dead silent. The headlights had dimmed, casting long, eerie shadows across the trees. I fumbled for my flashlight and opened the door. stepping into the thick fog. The air felt heavy, each breath a struggle. And then I saw her, standing in front of the truck. She was closer this time, her face clearer. Her lips twisted into that same grotesque grin, and she pointed behind me. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. There, in the fog, was another figure, a man this time. His body was mangled, his clothes torn and bloodied. His eyes were hollow like hers, but his face was twisted in pain. Then more appeared, dozens of them. Men, women, even children, all staring at me with those empty sockets. They surrounded the truck, their whispers growing louder, blending into a deafening chorus. "Turn back, turn back, turn back." I dropped to my knees, covering my ears. "I'm sorry," I screamed. "I didn't know." The woman in white stepped closer. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. "You'll never leave," she whispered. When I opened my eyes again, I was sitting in the driver's seat, the engine running. The road ahead was clear, the fog gone. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, but the clock on the dashboard still read 12, and my GPS had reset to Route 66A. But no matter which direction I went, I always ended up back on that same road. Days turned into weeks, though the clock never moved. My fuel never ran out, and I never grew hungry or thirsty. It was as if time itself had abandoned me. Now I drive that endless road, passing the same trees, the same shadows, over and over. Sometimes I see her in the distance, watching me. Sometimes I hear the whispers of the others, warning me to turn back. But there's nowhere to go. I'm trapped here, a prisoner of the road. And if you ever find yourself on Route A, take my advice. Don't stop. Don't look. And whatever you do, turn back. I lost track of how long I'd been driving. Time didn't make sense anymore. The road felt alive, like it was feeding on my fear and despair. The sky above stayed a lifeless black. No moon, no stars, just an endless void pressing down on me. But one day, or what felt like a day, I noticed something different. Up ahead, the faint glow of headlights pierced the darkness. It was another truck, coming toward me from the opposite direction. My heart leapt. I wasn't alone after all. I flashed my high beams, desperate to get the driver's attention. As the truck drew closer, I honked my horn, waving out the window like a madman. The other driver didn't respond. Their rig glided silently past mine, and I caught a glimpse of the cab. It was me. My heart stopped. The driver was an exact copy of me, down to the plaid shirt I was wearing. He stared straight ahead, his face pale and expressionless, as if he was part of the truck itself. The trailer rattled behind him, empty and rusted, like it hadn't carried a load in years. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the asphalt. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the other truck was gone, swallowed by the fog. After that, I started seeing more figures on the road. Sometimes they stood on the shoulder, their faces turned toward me as I passed. Other times they wandered into the middle of the lane, forcing me to swerve to avoid them. They never reacted, never flinched, just stared with those hollow eyes as if daring me to stop. One night, I spotted someone ahead who looked different. It was a man, wearing a modern-looking jacket and jeans. He was waving both arms, trying to flag me down. Against every instinct screaming at me, I slowed the truck and rolled down the window. "You've got to help me." His face was pale and sunken, but his eyes were normal, real human eyes filled with desperation. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door lock. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "I've been stuck here for weeks," he cried. "I can't get off this road. Every time I think I've found a way out, it just brings me back. Please let me ride with you. Maybe we can figure this out together." I didn't know what to do. The rules of this place were beyond me. But seeing another person, hearing a real voice, it was like a lifeline. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. "Climb in," I said. He didn't need to be told twice. The man scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut behind him. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. You're the first trucker I've seen in weeks. I thought I was losing my mind." I nodded, gripping the wheel tightly. "You're not alone. I've been stuck here too. Do you know what's happening?" He shook his head. "Not really. All I know is this road is some kind of trap. I've seen others, people who didn't make it. They changed, became part of this place. I don't want to end up like them." As we drove, the man who introduced himself as Kevin shared what he'd learned. "There are rules here," he said, his voice low. "Break them, and you'll end up like the others." "What kind of rules?" I asked, my eyes scanning the road. "Don't stop unless you have to," Kevin said. "Don't look too long at anything strange. And if you hear your name being called, don't answer." I swallowed hard. "What happens if you answer?" Kevin's face darkened. "You'll vanish. I've seen it happen. One guy I met, Bill, heard his wife's voice calling him from the woods. He ran after it, and he never came back." A shiver ran down my spine. This place wasn't just a trap, it was alive, and it fed on people's weaknesses. After hours of driving, Kevin fiddled with the truck's radio, twisting the dial back and forth. Static filled the cab, but then faintly we heard a voice. "This is Route A. If you're hearing this, don't stop. Keep moving. There's a way out." My heart raced. "Did you hear that? Someone else is out there." Kevin nodded, his eyes wide. "But did you hear what he said? There's a way out. We just have to find it." We drove in silence, listening to the radio for more clues. Occasionally the signal would cut through the static, but the voice was always faint, as if it was being broadcast from another world. Hours, or maybe days, later, the fog began to thin, and for the first time, I saw something different, a fork in the road. One path was bathed in soft golden light, the other shrouded in darkness. A small wooden sign stood between them, its faded letters barely readable. "Choose wisely. No second chances." We stared at it, our breaths heavy with tension. "What do we do?" he whispered. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. "The light seems like the right choice." Kevin hesitated. "But what if it's a trick? What if that's what this place wants us to think?" I didn't answer. My instincts told me to trust the light, but the memory of the woman in white made me doubt everything. In the end, I took a deep breath and turned toward the golden path. The moment we entered, the truck jolted violently and the radio screamed with static. Kevin clutched the dashboard, shouting something I couldn't hear. The light grew blinding, and for a moment, I thought we'd made the wrong choice. Then, suddenly, everything went still. When I opened my eyes, the truck was parked at a rest stop under a bright morning sky. Birds chirped in the distance, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted through the air. Kevin was gone, his seat empty, but I wasn't surprised. Something told me he'd found his way out too. I stepped out of the truck, my legs shaky. A group of truckers stood nearby, chatting casually. One of them glanced at me and waved. "You alright, buddy? You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a rough night. I never told anyone what happened on Route A, and I never took a delivery that required back roads again. But every now and then, when I'm driving late at night, I catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror, something pale and hollow-eyed, watching from the darkness. And I remind myself of Kevin's words, don't stop, don't look, and whatever you do, don't answer. Life seemed to go back to normal after that night, or as normal as it could be after experiencing something so unexplainable. I avoided late-night hauls, stuck to major highways, and never trusted GPS blindly again. But deep down, I knew that I'd never truly escaped Route A. The first sign came a few weeks later. I was parked at a truck stop, sipping coffee in my cab, when I glanced in the side mirror. At first I thought I was imagining it, but there it was, a figure standing at the edge of the lot, half hidden in the shadows. It was her, the woman in white. She didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. She just stood there, staring at me. I blinked and she was gone. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the aftermath of trauma. But the sightings didn't stop. The nightmares began soon after. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that cursed road, the fog pressing in around me. I'd see Kevin, his face twisted in terror as he was dragged into the darkness by invisible hands. I'd hear the whispers again, louder than ever, calling my name. Sometimes, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I could still hear the engine of my truck idling, even though I was lying in bed at home. I'd wake up gasping for air. The woman's hollow eyes burned into my mind. I tried everything, sleep aids, therapy, even quitting trucking altogether for a while. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that Route 66A wasn't done with me. A few months later, I was offered a short-haul delivery, just a couple of hours round trip. It seemed safe enough, and I needed the money. I hesitated but eventually agreed. The route was straightforward, no back roads, no detours. But halfway through the drive, my GPS recalculated, directing me to an alternate route. My stomach sank when I saw the road sign, Route 66A. My hands tightened on the wheel. "Not again," I muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. I switched off the GPS, pulled out a paper map, and confirmed that I didn't need to go anywhere near that road. I started back on my original path, ignoring the device entirely, but the signs wouldn't stop. Every few miles I'd see one pointing toward Route A, even when the map didn't list it. The road seemed to follow me, its presence an unwelcome shadow. That night, as I drove through a stretch of empty highway, the fog returned. It rolled in thick and fast, swallowing the road ahead. My headlights barely cut through it, and the air grew colder, chilling me to the bone. The whispers started again, faint at first, then louder. My name echoed through the cab, the voices overlapping like a choir of the damned. John, turned back, hands on the wheel. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my voice cracking. The truck shuddered violently, and the engine sputtered. I pulled over, my hands shaking. The fog pressed against the windows, and I knew what was coming. She appeared just beyond the hood, her white dress glowing faintly in the darkness. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine as she raised a pale hand and pointed toward the woods. I stayed frozen, too terrified to move. But then I remembered Kevin's words, "Don't look too long, don't answer." I tore my eyes away, shutting them tight. The whispers grew louder, almost unbearable, but I didn't give in. "You can't have me," I whispered, clutching the steering wheel. "I'm not yours." The truck roared back to life on its own, and the whispers stopped. When I opened my eyes, the fog was gone, and so was she. The road ahead was clear, and the night was eerily quiet. I made it back home safely, but I knew that Route 66A wasn't finished with me. It was waiting, watching, biding its time. I've started leaving notes in truck stops, warning other drivers about the cursed road. I don't know if anyone listens, but I have to try. Every so often, I'll hear about a trucker who vanished without a trace, their rig found abandoned on some forgotten stretch of highway. And I wonder if they ignored the signs, if they stopped when they shouldn't have, if they answered when their name was called. As for me, I keep driving, sticking to the main roads and never taking shortcuts. But I know I'm living on borrowed time. One day, Route 66A will find me again. And when it does, I'm not sure I'll make it out a second time. If you're out there reading this, remember my story. If you ever see a road marked Route 66A, no matter how lost or desperate you are, don't take it. Turn around. Go back the way you came. Because once you're on that road, it won't let. The warnings I left at truck stops started to take on a life of their own. I'd scrawl quick notes, avoid Route 66A at all costs, or turn back if you see the fog. Sometimes, I'd meet other truckers who claimed to have heard the whispers or seen the signs but had been lucky enough to escape. Their stories were eerily similar to mine, detours that didn't make sense, a thick fog, strange figures on the road. It wasn't just truckers either. A couple traveling cross-country told me they'd been led down a strange road by their GPS late one night. They'd spotted a woman in a white dress standing in the middle of the lane, her face obscured by shadows. They turned around just in time, but their car stalled for hours after that, as if the road was punishing them for leaving. I began to wonder if Route 66A was spreading, pulling in more people like a web stretching wider. It wasn't just a road, it was a force, something ancient and malevolent, feeding on fear and despair. One night, as I hauled a load through a deserted stretch of highway, I saw something that froze my blood. In the distance, a convoy of trucks was moving steadily, their headlights piercing the darkness. At first, I felt relieved. Other drivers meant I wasn't alone. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The trucks were old, rusted hulks that looked like they'd been abandoned for decades. Their headlights flickered unnaturally, and their trailers groaned as they rolled. The drivers were shadows, barely visible through the cracked windshields. The convoy moved in perfect unison, their engines eerily silent. I slowed down, letting them pass, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of one of the drivers. His face was pale and hollow, his eyes sunken and lifeless. He looked at me for a split second, and I recognized him. It was Kevin. I nearly ran off the road as the realization hit me. Kevin, the man who had shared my cab, the man who had helped me survive Route 66A, was now part of it. I wanted to scream, to stop and try to pull him out, but I knew better. That wasn't Kevin anymore. Whatever he was now, he belonged to the road. The convoy disappeared into the fog, leaving me shaking in my seat. I realized then that escape wasn't the route didn't just trap you, it consumed you, made you a part of its twisted world. And once you were taken, there was no coming back. As time went on, I started to feel the pull of rote, more strongly. It was like an itch at the back of my mind, a constant whisper urging me to return. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the sound of a distant engine roaring in my ears. One night, I woke up behind the wheel of my truck, parked on the side of the road. I had no memory of getting there. My GPS was turned on, the destination set to Route 66A. I threw the device out the window and drove back home, my hands shaking the entire way. I knew then that it wasn't just about avoiding the road. Route 66A was inside me now, a part of me. It was waiting, slowly wearing me down until I had no choice but to return. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much longer I can resist. The whispers are louder than ever, and the pull is almost unbearable. I've stopped driving long-haul routes, but it doesn't matter. The road will find me, one way or another. If you're reading this, take it as a warning. Route 66A is real, and it doesn't let go. If you ever see the fog, hear the whispers, or spot a woman in white on the side of the road, don't stop. Don't look. And whatever you do, don't let her into your truck. As for me, I know my time is running out. One day soon, I'll get back behind the wheel, and I won't be able to stop myself. I'll take that final drive down Route A, and when I do, I'll become part of it. So if you're out there on the road, and you see an old truck with a hollow-eyed driver staring straight ahead, don't stop. Don't try to help. Just turn back and pray the road doesn't follow you. The whispers finally grew too loud to ignore. I lasted as long as I could, but deep down, I always knew how this would end. One night, I woke up behind the wheel again, my truck idling on an unfamiliar stretch of road. The GPS, which I hadn't touched in weeks, was glowing softly, the route already mapped out. Route A. I didn't fight it this time. The road had won. My hands gripped the wheel tightly as I eased the truck onto the darkened highway. The fog was waiting, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the world behind me. The signs were all the same, their faded letters mocking me. No U-turns, no exits, no hope. The woman in white appeared on the side of the road, her hollow eyes fixed on mine as I passed. This time, she smiled. As I drove deeper into the fog, the world I knew faded away. The radio crackled with static, broken occasionally by faint, distorted voices, familiar voices. Kevin's, the truckers I'd met at rest stops, even my own voice, calling out as if from another life. The road stretched on forever, bending and twisting in ways that defied logic. Time lost all meaning. Days, months, maybe even years passed, but I never grew tired, never needed sleep. The road kept me going, its endless hum the only sound. I began to notice other trucks around me, their headlights glowing faintly in the fog. They moved in unison, a convoy of the lost, their drivers pale and hollow-eyed. I recognized some of them, Kevin, the couple I'd warned, even drivers I'd only heard about through rumor. I had become one of them. Some nights, I think about the world I left behind, about the people I tried to warn. I wonder if my notes at the truck stops are still there or if they've been erased by the road. Sometimes I see other trucks wandering into the fog, their drivers clueless about what awaits them. I try to honk, to flash my lights, to warn them to turn back, but it's no use. They're already part of the road's trap. And so, I drive. The whispers are quiet now, their work complete. The road has claimed me, and I know I'll never leave. But if you're out there, and you see a truck like mine disappearing into the fog, take it as your last chance to turn around. Because once you're on Route 66A, there's no escape.